So let's start with the United States, just one day away from reaching its borrowing limit, having to take, quote, extraordinary measures to keep paying its bills, while congressional Democrats in the White House have been calling for a straightforward debt ceiling bill that would only give the government money it needs to pay on existing obligations. Republicans want certain concessions. Some of their demands include balancing the budget over 10 years, as well as dollar-for-dollar spending cuts. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy talked about the parameters of any debt ceiling increase yesterday.
Is a clean debt ceiling off the table?
Well, I don't see why you would continue the past behavior. Well, would that mean we wouldn't do any appropriations bills and we just do an omni, that we wouldn't even do a budget? Yeah, that's totally off the table. Who wants to put the nation in some type of threat at the last minute of debt ceiling? Nobody wants to do that. That's why we're asking, let's change our behavior now. Let's sit down. He's the president. We're the majority in the House. The Democrats are the majority in the Senate, and let's, exactly the way the founders designed Congress to work, find the compromise and find the common sense compromise that puts us back onto a balanced budget.
If Congress does not vote to raise the debt ceiling by early June, the consequences could be catastrophic for the American economy and for everyday Americans themselves. Estimated the country could lose 3 million jobs, and individual Americans could lose thousands in 401k savings. So, Joe, we should clarify that deadline of tomorrow was put forward by Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, saying we can't pay our bills at that point, but we do have ways to get us to, let's say, June, even early July. So a bit of an artificial deadline tomorrow, but obviously this is a crisis that is looming here.
Well, the markets will be looking, Steve, we'll get to Steve Ratner in a second to talk about that, but the markets are going to be looking all along. They're going to be listening to what the Treasury Secretary says. They're also going to be looking at the financial situation here. What's so fascinating, though, and I would love somebody to ask Kevin McCarthy, I'd love somebody to ask these Republicans who were suddenly born again, balanced budgeters. I'd love to ask them, where were they when Donald Trump was president? Where were they when they controlled the House? Where were they when they controlled the Senate? Where were they when they controlled the White House? Where were they when they controlled all three? Let me tell you where they were. They were right there, pigs at the trough, increasing the deficit and America's federal debt to record levels in 2017. In 2018, Donald Trump again in 2019, in 2020. Kevin McCarthy never said anything like this in 2017 or 18 or 19 or 20. None of these backbenchers said anything about this in 2017, 28. How do I know? Because I kept talking about it. And no Republican wanted to talk about it. I even talked to Mark Meadows when he was ahead of the Freedom Caucus. I said, Mark, this is what you're supposed to do. Stop chasing conspiracy theories. Work on a plan to balance the budget. Work on the plan to rein in spending, because if you don't do it when you have a president in the White House, you're going to have no credibility when you have a Democrat in the White House. And John Heilman, that's where we are. Why in the hell would any Democrat listen to these people acting like they're fiscally responsible when we saw the deficit explode when Republicans ran Washington under George W. Bush, and it's exploded again to record levels under Donald Trump. And now suddenly they found religion. I mean, this is going to end really badly for Republicans. Like they can figure out how to negotiate a peaceful way out of this now, or they can do it after the economy crashes down. But the Democrats aren't going to move on this, and they certainly shouldn't move on this, because this is pure political posturing.
Yeah, and I think that's really one of the great lessons of the last, let's say, new millennial politics, Joe, like after 2000, right? Now that we had 2 terms of George W. Bush and we had 1 term of Donald Trump, there's been, more Republicans in the White House in this century than there have been Democrats in terms of years, right? And what that record in this period of time has demonstrated is exactly this fact, which is that whatever Republicans once thought about the deficit, whatever they once thought about spending, about fiscal discipline, about reforming entitlements, about all the things that back in your day, at least, people both paid lip service to and occasionally voted on, they no longer have any credibility on those issues. If you think about those 12 years of Republican presidencies and then the 8 years of Obama and now 2 years of Biden, what's pretty clear is that Republicans has become the the kind of phrase that sums it all up. They care about deficits when Democrats are in office. They don't care about deficit at all when Republicans are in the White House. And every Democrat and every thinking person, you just can't look at the record of the red ink spilled in the Bush and Trump administrations, and particularly when Republicans were in control, and not draw that conclusion. I think Democrats, finally, there's not very much of a caucus anymore in the Democratic Party for pretending the Republican Party is serious about this stuff. They look at them and say, you know what, you're not serious about this, and it's going to make the idea of coming to bipartisan consensus on taxing and spending, and particularly on spending, is a fantasy as long as the Republican Party continue to behave that way, because Democrats understand that it's a fraud.
The number is $7.8 trillion added to the debt during the Trump years, thanks in large part to those tax cuts.
Good number. Good number.
So, Steve, let's talk about the implications of all this. I think the debt ceiling can be a bit of a vague concept to a lot of people who don't pay as close attention to all this as you do. How serious is this moment? How important is it to meet our debt obligations? And what could happen if this Congress doesn't get moving?
It's deadly serious, Willie. The debt obligations of the country, the 22 or so billion, $1 trillion dollars of debt out there, are in effect this country's home mortgage. This is money that we borrowed along the way to pay for our other expenses. And to continue the homeowner analogy, if you default on your mortgage, you're going to have it's going to have very severe consequences on your credit rating, on your ability to spend money, on your ability to borrow money, on your ability to function as a family. It's a really bad thing. You put some numbers up before about the potential consequences. We saw some of this in 2011 when we almost defaulted, closest we've ever gotten, downgraded by the S&P from our AAA rating, at least for a time. And it had permanent costs to the economy. The stock market fell sharply. Jobs ended up being lower than people thought they otherwise would be. And even when it was resolved, we put ourselves into this economic straitjacket of very artificial budget cuts, not a thoughtful way of going about dealing with the deficit, which a lot of us know we have to do. But it was a disaster. And this is one that seems even scarier because the Republicans, frankly, seem even crazier than they were in 2011.
You know, just following up on what Willie said on his number, think about this. It took the United States of America 225 years to build up a $7.8 trillion debt. Took us 225 years. John Heilemann, Republicans in 4 years, in just 4 years, built up a $7.8 trillion debt. So, yes, they're raging hypocrites. But also, John, you and I have been around long enough that we're going to get AB in a second, because she certainly has been around like us to see these fights before. We know how this ends, right? You've got 4, 5, 6 extremists in the House of Representatives that are willing to wreck the economy because they don't care. They'll just raise more money off of wrecking the economy, destroying the economy. You've got Democrats running the Senate. You have Democrats running the White House. You've got Democrats, 212 votes in the House of Representatives. There's no way that they're going to fold to a couple of extremists. So what does that mean? We're going to get pushed up against a deadline. Things are going to melt down. And then you're going to have Republicans folding, just like the Wall Street Journal said. You know they will, especially the Republicans that got elected in Biden's district. So again, this is all gesturing. This is all farce. But the problem is they could wreck the economy. They could cost 3 million people to lose their jobs. They could cost people billions of dollars in 401k accounts. Like this is gesturing with a catastrophic price potentially.
Right, and of course, part of the reason, Joe, is you just rattled off all the Democrats who, the power of Democrats in the Senate, the White House controlled by Democrats. The other thing is that the person who thinks about this much the same way as all those Democrats is Mitch McConnell, who looks at all this and thinks, not exactly the same way, but Mitch McConnell more or less is like, we're not going to default on our debt. And so they have a powerful ally in McConnell, who one of the great shows in Washington over the course of the next however long Kevin McCarthy holds on to the speakership is going to be the interplay between McCarthy and McConnell, because the performance politics here, Joe, in addition to crazy Republicans in the House who are performing in order to raise money. The other performance politics here is, and this is a good toss to AB, who had an excellent piece about McCarthy, is McCarthy's performance here. McCarthy knows what the end game here is, but he's so desperate, as we now have seen, evidently over the course of this month of January, to do anything that's required to get and keep hold of the speakership. He now must enact this kind of kamikaze politics, even if deep in his heart or in somewhere in the back of his head, he knows what the end game here really is and what kind of damage would be done, not just to the country and the economy, but to the Republican Party if there were really a default. But he's going to play this game because he knows he has to appease the hardline caucus among House Republicans. And so we're going to see that it's kabuki, but it's very dangerous kabuki theater. But that's what this is about, right? This is really now going to boil down to what Kevin McCarthy is willing to do and how close to the line he's willing to go to keep those people on board, those far right Congress people on board, and not trying to vacate his speakership and put that back up to yet another vote.
Yeah, and John brings up a great point. You have Republicans also, whether you're talking about Mitch McConnell, whether you're talking about Republican donors, whether you're talking about small business owners, whether you're talking about big business owners, whether you're talking about anybody with a stake in the economy that's just not playing to the most extreme in the Republican base. You've got all of these people that want this crisis resolved. Right. They don't want it to become a crisis. And so the cards are all stacked against Kevin McCarthy on this kamikaze mission. It will not only wreck the economy, it will also be the final straw for people that are holding out hope that the Republican Party finally becomes a mainstream party. So this is just a lose-lose for McCarthy. And again, the sooner he can figure out a way out of it, the better he's going to be.
I'm not sure what the way...